So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. I will be your moderator and technical support for today's session. Today's session was rescheduled, so hopefully you were able to join us today. And our topic is anxiety and de-escalation strategies, and we are joined by Allie Franson. She is a licensed clinical social worker consultant that we've hired to do this session for you today. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit more in just a second. Allie, if you want to go to the next slide for me. So again, my name is Kirsten Bayer. I'm with ICSPS. Yes, it is a full mouthful of an acronym, but hopefully you know a little bit about us. I'm just making sure everybody can chat each other really quickly. Okay. So you should be able to chat in the chat now if you want to say good morning. So I apologize for that. So this is my email. I will be here for technical support. If you need anything, feel free to reach out to me via email like after the session, or you can chat me or type in the Q&A if you need me. I will be here to support Allie and all of you today. Allie, you can go to the next slide for me. So we have our beginning Workforce Wednesday webinar polls that we do for our analytics. So you're probably familiar with these, but we always appreciate you participating in them. I'm going to go ahead and launch those now. The first one is where's your local area? And the second one is which partner do you best represent? So if you could answer those for me right now, you should be able to scroll and answer both polls. I see everybody's typing in the chat. Good morning. So thank you. So while you guys are all answering those polls, I'm going to do some housekeeping items. So first and foremost, this session is being recorded. Today's recording typically takes about 48 business hours to get the editing for closed captions. So be on the lookout on Friday morning for this recording to be up on our website. I can put the link to that website in the chat here momentarily. On that website will also be Allie's presentation that she's so graciously given us today. I will also put that in the chat momentarily so you can have access to her presentation right now live during the session, but we'll also have it up on the website. And then tomorrow you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the website and a link to a follow-up survey. If you have a second in your workday, we appreciate your feedback on this session or any other topics that you would like to hear about on our Workforce Wednesday webinar, professional development. We have a WIOA professional development committee that does help us in planning the PD that we put out on the Workforce Wednesday webinars. So we do look at that follow-up survey every time that we meet with them. So please take the time to fill that out if there's some topics that you would love to know more about or hear more about or get professional development on. We are on Zoom webinar today, not Zoom meeting. So most of you are familiar with Zoom meeting probably. The biggest difference is that you cannot unmute yourselves and you cannot turn on your video. So this is more of a presenter audience formatted platform. So if you're confused on that, that is why. So if you would like to participate today, if you have a comment or a question or a concern, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A. I will be monitoring both as Allie is presenting, and then towards the end of the session, we'll have time for Q&A, and Allie will answer any of your questions, as well as I can too, if they're regarding like presentation or website or something like that. And we also have closed captioning on today, so feel free to turn that on for accessibility reasons, or I just like to take notes sometimes on sessions, so you can feel free to do that as well. Okay, and then I think that's all the housekeeping items I have. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Looks like most of us are joining from, oh, we have a good span across the state. Awesome. Well, we are so glad about that. We know we have a long state. So, and then Title I and Title II, we actually have a lot of other WIOA partners and stakeholders as well. So awesome. Great to see a good span of the system on today's session. We know it's so important. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Allie. You can just go to the next slide, Allie, and kind of skip that one. And then I will be here if anybody needs me. And I'll hand it off to Allie.
Thank you so much. So as Kirsten said, my name is Allie Franson. I am a LCSW consultant and we'll be going over de-escalation and anxiety. And I'm very happy to be here. I've been working in crisis for about 5 years now. So some objectives for the webinar today. We want to be able to identify escalating and crisis situations, understand basic techniques to de-escalate crisis situations, understand verbal and nonverbal communication techniques, identify and understand our own personal responses to crises or escalated situations, and then understand some basic skills to kind of manage that anxiety and stress that comes from those situations. So before jumping into defining or understand crises and escalating situations, I want to ensure we understand what de-escalation is and the overall goal of it, so we can be actively thinking about that as we're learning about escalated or crisis situations. So the definition of de-escalation is to decrease intensity, magnitude, or difficulty of a conflict, crisis, or potentially violent situation. And that overall goal is to reduce anxiety, anger, frustration, or any other strong emotion in order to create a possibility of resolution or discussion on the initial issue or concern. So we really want to build a sense of connectedness to try to reduce the likelihood of escalation in the first place, or to stop escalation as quickly as possible. So why and when would we need de-escalation? So first, we want to define what an escalating situation is, or what a crisis is. So most often it's going to be short-term and overwhelming, and that's going to be for everyone involved. It involves a disruption or a breakdown of an individual's typical way of functioning, communicating, or presenting themselves. So if it's someone that you work with often, it's going to be a very different experience or interaction with them than you're used to. There is an increase in the level of conflict, and over time, it becomes a more serious or intense interaction. And it's usually, you can usually feel it increase in the room. And now that we've defined that, we can kind of look more into understanding what causes situations like this. So what would cause a situation to escalate or turn into a crisis? So some common causes of a situation either escalating or turning into a crisis would be a power struggle, pride, clashing personalities, feeling like you're not being heard, feeling belittled, feeling threatened, maybe some bad communication. So that could be the tone of voice of either the escalated individual or the helper or person who is not escalated in the situation. It could be facial expressions or body language. So communication is a very big cause. Drugs or alcohol can be involved. There can be a lack of control or a feeling of a lack of control. And then there can be an impact of the individual not in crisis or the helper in the situation. So their own issues can become involved, and they can kind of get defensive, and that can lead to provoking, and that provoking can be intentional, but it can also be unintentional. So it's really important to kind of understand where you're at in these situations, which we will go over here in a little bit. So as we're kind of looking at the signs of escalating situations, we want to ask ourselves how this overarching theme of feeling unsafe is going to appear, or what that looks like. So if we are thinking about the escalated individual, their behavior is going to change. They're not going to just immediately start as escalated unless they began outside of either like your place of employment or the environment that they're escalated in. But usually it's going to be a gradual process rather than just all at once. So a change in their mood, pacing, so that could be just different movement than they were doing, or it could be an actual pacing around the room. their eyes will change. So eye contact could stop completely. They could just avoid looking at you altogether. They could start kind of scanning the room, looking around, or they could be making too much eye contact or staring without interruption. And then there could be an increased hostility or tension when they're communicating with you, or just in their body language, or that change in body language or facial expressions could look like clenched fists or breathing heavily or very quickly. They could become like flushed or red in the face or neck or chest area. And again, the unbroken staring or the mouth tightening can all be signs of someone who is going to be escalating or is already escalating. So what do we do if we are noticing these changes in behavior? If we look back at the overall goal of de-escalation, we can see that we are wanting to focus on responses and interactions that can help with any anxiety, anger, or frustration that the person is feeling that is causing the behaviors I just listed. So becoming frustrated or increased hostility or tension, their body language changing. So we want to try to decrease those. So we want to focus on building a sense of connection with that person and understanding what that individual is going through. And that's the de-escalation process in general. So the person who is escalated or in crisis, this is how they see the situation. You're the barrier to their unmet need being filled. So we want to change that view and have them look at it as we are working with them to get their unmet need filled instead of against them. And de-escalation can help because it increases communication and it allows for the person to feel heard, to share what they're needing, and to actually get to the kind of deep down feelings or situation that originally brought them in. So we want to focus on how they're feeling and what led them to that feeling, to kind of move ourselves out of that barrier and into working with the person side by side. So some basic de-escalation techniques. We want to understand that acting in any sort of authoritative, controlling, or confrontational way will just lead to the situation escalating or turning into a full-on crisis. So it's very important for the individual who is escalated or in crisis. They need to have a sense of control, and they need to feel like they are controlling that situation more than you are controlling that situation to even start calming down. So if we as the helping individual or the person not in crisis, if we're less authoritative, less controlling, and less confrontational, where you will actually have more control over the situation because they are going to feel as if they have that authority, that control, and that they're being confrontational. So it's very important to really take a step back and turn down the control and confrontation and authority. This is going to be something that is very repetitive throughout the presentation because staying calm is probably one of the most important aspects of de-escalation. People feed off each other's energy. And so if you as the helper, if you are not calm, it's going to escalate the situation. And we'll kind of look at a little bit later on what that may look like for you personally. But you yourself definitely want to stay calm. And then the environment around you, if however much control you have in that environment, you want to keep that calm too. So if there's a lot of noise, if there's a radio on, if there are crowds of people, we want to try to control that as much as possible so that everyone involved can have a reduced level of stress. So if we have a sense of calmness about ourselves and within our environment, the escalated person, you as the helper, and then anyone else in the room is going to have a reduction of stress. So keeping some distance between you and the person in crisis is really important. This can be, arm lengths away or a few feet away, or you can be physically separated by like a desk or just any other object within the room that is more of like a bigger piece of furniture, I guess. Because this is going to be for your benefit as well as their benefit. You are going to feel a lot safer and less anxious and less stressed in that situation if you are not as close to the person who's escalated. You also, again, want to keep a calm and low voice, especially compared to the individual in crisis. So if the person, which they most likely will, be yelling or have a raised voice, you do not want to match that at all. You want to keep your voice low and calm and avoid yelling or screaming as much as possible, because that will definitely escalate the situation. You also want to have a more relaxed body and posture. So you don't want to sit and cross your arms in front of them or really use like animated hands and arms while talking, because that can come across as more aggressive or can escalate the person and just make the situation a little worse if they are seeing a lot of moving parts. And then the posture, just kind of facing them and making sure that you are just not like crouched over or making yourself smaller, just standing up straight and facing them and making them kind of feel like they're being listened to and paid attention to. We also really want to use active listening. So there are a lot of different things that go into active listening, but some of the most important aspects that really help with de-escalation would be summarizing the person's concern or their problem. So what happened that led them to the situation, summarize that so that they know that you understand what they're actually saying, because that can instantly calm someone down because they feel heard and they feel understood. You also want to use attending behaviors. So that would be making eye contact when you're talking with them, and then when they're talking to you. You do want to keep in mind that it's not a staring contest. So too much eye contact can be taken as threatening and can escalate the situation. But too little eye contact can come across as you being fearful of them, which can also escalate the situation. So we want that like natural amount, what you would usually have in a regular conversation, or however much eye contact you would usually use in a situation. Again, facing the person as they're talking, this makes you appear more open to what they're saying because you are facing them, and it's a respect type thing. You also want to use the individual's name. It personalizes it and it makes it so they feel as if you know who they are. You also want to use some statements to let them know you're listening. So, okay, yes, go on. I want you to notice that these are very minimal responses, though. They don't interrupt the person as they're speaking. They just let them know that you're listening. You don't want to interrupt them as they are kind of explaining what they're doing. And then with those minimal responses, you want to add in the nodding of the head or the shaking of the head, kind of matching whatever direction they're going in. So that could be if they're saying that something is either negative or bad, maybe that would be shaking your head. If it's something that's positive or something that they like, maybe nodding your head would match the situation a little bit better. You also want to ask open-ended questions. So closed-ended, yes, no questions don't allow you to understand, and the escalated person knows that. So asking those open-ended questions is going to allow them to feel heard, understood, and to explain themselves a little bit better, so you know how to better help them and get them to a point where maybe they are not as escalated. Pausing and silence is very, very helpful. So if you pause or allow for some silence, this is going to allow that escalated individual to process what you're saying, think about what they want to say next or what their next move would be, but it also allows you to do the same thing. So if you allow for that silence or that pause, you can, okay, what did that person say? Let me process that, and what do I need to do next? Are they getting more escalated? And do I need assistance? Are they kind of calming down? And do I have kind of a control or handle over this? And the silence also just allows them to feel listened to as well, because you're not interrupting and you're allowing them to kind of speak and get everything out. It's also very important to set some boundaries and limits with them. So these should be very direct, but also respectful. So if someone is escalated and they are not de-escalating, they are not calming down, they're not getting to a point where you can have a cordial conversation with them, or at least if it is a more tense conversation, they're not using less, maybe swearing less, or maybe their voice is not coming down, you can say something like, would you like to continue filling out this paperwork together calmly? Or would you prefer to stop and come back when things can be more relaxed? So you're giving them two options to pick from themselves, but you're also setting a boundary or a limit for them and for yourself. So you kind of have a way to step away and get out of that situation if it's not de-escalating. You also want to align yourself with them, or kind of be on their side when discussing the issue. That doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with their behavior or you agree with what they're saying, but coming across as aligned with the individual is going to get you a lot further in de-escalating them and a lot further solving the problem than not aligning yourself with them. So if there are any sort of rules or policies in place that will escalate the person further, you do not want to take that responsibility on yourself, and you do not want to put responsibility on any other individual person either. You would want to place that on like the institution or the company, so that you still look aligned and you're basically saying, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but this policy that the company has, I really cannot do that, or that isn't a possibility. But maybe I can get so and so over here because they specialize in that area. So really just aligning yourself in that moment with them, rather than yeah, I'm not going to do that, and not explaining why. And then the one of the last things with this is to respond to information or factual questions, even if they're maybe not said in the nicest of ways. So if they are, you know, swearing within the question, but they are genuinely asking about information or facts, answer that. But you don't have to answer anything that is insulting or abusive. So if they say, you know, why does every worker here suck? That's not informational, that's not factual. They are just trying to escalate further. So you would not answer that question, and you would actually kind of ignore that question. Some verbal de-escalation techniques that we want to also utilize. So I statements are very important. If we are saying, you know, you, that is going to feel very blame-like for the person. If you're using I statements, that kind of dissipates the blame in a way, and just allows them to hear you, but not feel blamed at the same time. And then again, it's repetitive, but a low and calm voice is so important. You do not want to match the tone or the level of the escalated person's voice. You want to stay as calm and as low voiced as possible. Respectful communication. So everything that you respond with should be respectful, and you are encouraged to set those boundaries respectfully with the escalated person, but you have to kind of take into account that they are still, you know, a human being right in front of you, and they are feeling the way they're feeling for a certain reason. Like we talked about earlier, they have an unmet need, and so that is what is fueling the behavior. This may not necessarily be the type of person they are right now, but they're at a point where they don't know what else to do. So we set boundaries respectfully, we communicate respectfully, and then if at any time those boundaries or those limits are pushed, you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to end communication or even ask for help and kind of go from there. Paraphrasing and summarizing what the individual is saying really allows them to clarify if you maybe misheard or if you repeated something differently than what they intended. It allows them to feel heard, and it allows them to make sure that you know exactly what they are coming to you for or what they're upset about. Clarifying questions are really useful to gain more understanding of how that person is feeling. So you really want to be using those just as you're moving forward. It also allows for a bit of a break in moving further in any sort of process that you're working with the person on. So if you are kind of stuck in an area and you can't do anything further, asking clarifying questions allows you some time to kind of come up with a plan or get another person there who maybe could help. But it's just going to make the person feel a little bit more heard and like they're understood. You also want to validate how they're feeling and kind of accept how that person is feeling. So this is very different, again, from agreeing with them. You don't necessarily want to agree with how they're feeling because sometimes that can be really harmful and can come back later on if you say that you agree and then maybe your supervisor comes over or another person who is helping them with it and they say something opposite of what you agreed with, then that is going to escalate the situation further. So validate and accept their emotions, but don't let them think you are agreeing with them. You also want to use positive statements and be as honest as possible. So if you are being honest, you want to refrain from sharing any information that would escalate the person further. So if you are aware of a policy or something that is directly against what they're wanting and they don't maybe directly ask about it, it might be something that you don't choose to share in that moment. It doesn't mean that you don't share it in the future, but in that moment they're escalated, and the point of de-escalation is to kind of end that interaction either as quickly as possible or de-escalate it as quickly as possible to actually move forward with what you are wanting to accomplish or what that individual is wanting to accomplish. And then using some positive and helpful statements can be very useful as well. So saying something like, I want to help you, or let's call Mr. Supervisor, I know he's able to help with this, or let's call Miss Supervisor handles this for our district. Let's call her and ask her about the situation. She's always willing to help. So allowing yourself to pull in other people and make positive and helpful statements that the person is going to take as, okay, you know, they are trying to help. This isn't something that isn't being taken seriously because they are pulling other people in to help me. Explaining your actions is something that may feel not as natural, but it allows the person to feel informed about the entirety of the process, and you can kind of fill in maybe any unanswered questions in their head because you're explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it, which is explaining your intention. So if you are letting them know, okay, I am sending this message or grabbing this piece of paper for this reason, they are going to feel like you are being very open and honest with them and that you're actually doing everything you can to help them because you're explaining everything you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's going to let them feel a little bit more in control and like there is some sort of solution that you all can come to together and that they aren't, you know, wasting their time or anything like that. So along with verbal techniques, there's also nonverbal techniques. So body language is huge. You want to have a relaxed body, a relaxed posture. You want to face them as much as possible when you're speaking to them and when they're speaking to you. You want to appear as calm as possible, even if you're not, which we'll kind of talk a little bit later on about how that looks or how that works. And you want to minimize any like excessive movements or gesturing at all. So you don't want to, again, aggressively or use your hands to talk a lot, because that's going to be alarming to someone who's escalated. You also want your facial expressions to be kind of neutral rather than very animated. You want to look attentive. You don't want to look angry or disgusted or scared. It's just like a neutral, attentive facial expression. So you're coming across as there to listen, there to help, rather than afraid of the person or disgusted by their behavior or upset by their behavior. Eye contact, again, you should maintain eye contact as much as possible, but again, not staring. That's going to be very important. If we prolong our eye contact more than we would usually, or if we are kind of glaring or they're glaring, that situation's going to escalate. And then always trying to match the level of the person that is escalated. So you always want to try to get the person to sit down, because that is going to kind of physiologically calm the body down. But if they refuse to sit, you standing up and kind of matching that level is perfect. It's okay to do. And you want to kind of be almost like matching eye level with them as much as possible. So we've talked a little bit about what to do, but there are some behaviors you also want to avoid. These will all escalate a situation very quickly, and they're super unhelpful when you are working with someone who's escalated. You do not want to make assumptions. You don't want to assume that you know what they're saying, what they're wanting, or what they're needing. That's what asking open-ended or clarifying questions is for, is to let them tell you instead of assuming. You want to try to not become defensive, because they will be defensive in return. You don't want to criticize or lecture or order them around. That is coming across in that authoritative way that we talked about earlier. And again, less authoritative equals more control on our side. Arguing arguing with them is a lost cause. They are very set in what they are thinking, because they are escalated. Their brain is kind of taken over in a defensive, I'm not getting a need met, so I need to act in this way to get what I want or get what I need. So if you're arguing with them, you're going to be kind of talking to a brick wall, and they are just going to get more and more escalated. You don't want to blame them for what is going on. So if something happened as a result of maybe something that they did, you don't want to say that. You don't want to say, if you didn't do this thing, this situation wouldn't be happening. Or if you didn't act in this way, you would have that need met, because that's not going to be helpful. Even if it's true, you don't need to say it in the moment, because that is just coming across in, again, an arguing way, or you're going to make them become defensive because you're criticizing them. You don't want to become angry or raise your voice or yell. Again, that calm voice, very, very important. You don't want to poorly listen. So doing multiple things at once when they're talking, not making eye contact, not summarizing what they're saying. So that active listening that we talked about earlier, you do not want to do the opposite of that. They're going to feel ignored, and they are going to escalate further. You don't want to prejudge them. So let's say you are entering into an escalated situation, helping someone else out. You don't want to prejudge and just assume that what they are escalated about is irrelevant or something that is unimportant. You want to enter that situation with an open mind and allow them to explain everything to you, and then move on from there. And the last thing you do not want to do is make promises. So you don't want to say, I promise I'll help you. I promise that we'll get this done. I promise that, we will get this paperwork through or get this process completed. Because as soon as that thing looks like it's not going to happen or doesn't happen, they are going to go from 5 to 10 very quickly. So we also want to understand our own personal responses to crises and stress and anxiety, because if we don't understand our own responses, we aren't going to be able to properly help the person coming to us, because we're going to be struggling regulating ourselves, so we won't even be able to think about de-escalating that person. So we want to ask ourselves a couple questions. What do I struggle with when it comes to disagreements or confrontations? So what do I struggle with when I'm stressed, when I am disagreeing with someone, when I am just in a situation where I don't have control? What do I struggle with? And how does my body feel or react when I'm in those situations? Because our actions and reactions can escalate a situation, and it can determine whether it's continuing to escalate or if there is even a possibility of de-escalation. So we want to be aware of ourselves and our responses. So if we are looking at that first question, what do I struggle with when it comes to disagreements or confrontations or stress or anxiety? If you are, let's say, a competitive person, that would be helpful, because you'd be aware that it would be easy for maybe a power struggle to come up or occur. So you can be aware of, okay, I'm a competitive person. I have that issue with a power struggle. So I need to take that into account when I am understanding or developing kind of skills for myself when I need to regulate myself in those situations. If you have an urge or a need to solve problems or a need for control, people-pleasing tendencies, you have to be right in every situation. You take things very personally. All of these different struggles in confrontations or disagreements, you want to be aware of. The point in figuring any of these things out about yourself is to be able to have some sort of control over your reactions and your kind of go-to behaviors in order to avoid escalating the situation further. So if you always have that need for control, you're going to want to know that, so you can take a step back as that is coming forward in your head. You're in a situation and that need for control comes up. You're already going to know that because you ask yourself this question. Okay, I struggle with a need for control, so I'm going to be sure that I am not focused on needing the control. I'm focused on helping that person in this moment and attempting to, help de-escalate them. We also have a physiological response, or like an internal body response to anxiety or stress or uncomfortable situations, confrontations, disagreements. So our first response to anxiety or a stressor is to feel something. So these emotions can vary from anger, fear, sadness, frustration, any intense emotion. Our body attempts to protect us with its natural response, so that fight or flight kicks in. So we have fight, flight, freeze. So our body is then kind of bracing for stress, and this is physiologically not, externally, but your body braces for that stress by releasing adrenaline, and that is to provide energy if it's needed to either like defend or protect ourselves in case there is a real threat. So if there is a real threat, we have adrenaline kind of coursing through our body, and that can be very helpful, but that can also be very dangerous for situations and unhelpful for situations that are escalating already. Because if there's not that actual threat or that perceived or confirmed threat, then you have all of this adrenaline coursing through your body and all of this energy that it wants to come out. It wants to release. It wants to protect you. So we need to understand kind of how to regain that control over the anxiety and stress induced emotions and the reactions that it causes, so that we can de-escalate ourselves or calm ourselves down before we even think about calming the person we're working with down. So these different physiological responses can also cause physical responses in your body. So understanding how we feel physically when under stress is important, because those physical reactions can be seen by the escalated individuals. They can influence their behavior, their reactions, and their responses to you. So if you become, flushed or red, if you become hot or overheated, sweaty hands, sweaty palms, nervous laughter or movement, if you get louder, or if you start shaking. So that could be a body shake or a voice shaking. So all of these responses and reactions are very natural and typical. Almost every person is going to experience some sort of physical reaction like this when it comes to that adrenaline kind of coursing through their body, because it's trying to get out. So it's coming out in either sweaty hands or nervous laughter or you getting louder, anything like that. So if we look at these responses, it can give you some insight to what that escalated person is feeling and experiencing. So it can allow you to understand a bit more than maybe you would have originally. So when we understand the different ways we act under stress, as well as the different ways our bodies feel and respond to it, we can manage it and develop different ways to help ourselves when we are dealing with these escalated individuals. So, like I said, it's very, very repetitive, but keeping yourself calm is very important. So paying attention to your body and catching when it starts to have those reactions. So if we are becoming hot, or if we're starting to nervously move, or if we're getting louder or shaking, being aware of that and knowing that, okay, that means that I'm starting to get a physical response to stress, or a physical response to anxiety, or I'm getting very uncomfortable in this situation. So knowing that, you can kind of counteract these natural responses. So most of the time, counteracting those natural responses are going to almost be doing the opposite of that natural response. So if you are very like you clench your jaw, or you clench your fists, or you are a very tight person when it comes to being in a stress situation because you're like bracing yourself, you would want to do the opposite and try to either relax the different areas that you tighten or the different areas that you clench, whether jaw or fists, or you would want to try to relax your entire body, and that can be done in a lot of different ways. There are progressive muscle relaxations where you kind of start with your feet and move up. Some people start with their head and move up, or you can start with your entire body and then move to different sections of your body. So that would look like kind of tightening your entire body for 5-10 seconds and then completely releasing your whole body from any sort of tension for the same amount of time, and then moving and tightening your toes for that 5 or 10 seconds and releasing, and then your feet, and then your calves, and then just moving up your entire body and really relaxing your body for the next interaction or the current interaction. Sometimes in the moment, you're obviously not going to be able to move through your entire body. So it can be helpful to just focus on the areas that are going to be clenched or maybe a little bit more tense. If you have any sort of nervous movement, you would want to do the opposite and have more intentional movement. So movement comes because the adrenaline gave you energy and it wants to get out of your body. So if you have nervous movement and your legs start shaking, or you are needing to get up and walk around, or your hands are shaking because you're nervous, you would want to change that to some sort of intentional movement of something that is within your grasp. So maybe it's a pen that you start moving in your hand, or maybe you have a name badge that you can grab onto and like just like feel the edges of or something. Or maybe you have a fidget at your desk or with you and you can use that. So you want to kind of allow yourself to have that movement so your body gets kind of tricked into, okay, they're moving, they're letting out this energy so I can start to calm down. If you're someone who maybe holds your breath when you get anxious, really having some intentional, purposeful breathing, whether that is doing some sort of, breathing in for 7, holding for 7, out for 7, counting to 7. That can be really helpful. Again, similar to the body clenching and relaxation. Sometimes in the moment we don't have time to do that, but it can be really helpful if we can do some sort of intentional breathing if you notice that you aren't breathing or you are holding your breath. If you're unable to do those things, faking the calmness if needed can be really helpful and can almost trick your brain into actually feeling calm. And if you're coming out or appearing calm, then you would be acting in that way towards the escalated individual. They would read you as calm, and you can start kind of calming in that way. So fake it till you make it is useful, but it's not a everyday type skill. So we don't want to do that in every situation. But if for some reason you are just not able to either do the opposite of your stressful, nervous laughter or shaking or anything, then faking it is perfectly fine. Some self-talk, so kind of let internally or externally, if you are able to, get a second away, saying, that you're okay, you're calm, you have this under control. I can ask for help if needed. I have support. So just really talking yourself kind of through the situation. I know what I'm doing. I know how to do this process that they're asking me to do. They're just a little bit more escalated than the normal person I do it with, but this is a walk in the park for me. I got this. So just some positive self-talk. And then maintaining that distance that we talked about earlier, that is also going to help your anxiety and help that stress level come down, because you are going to feel safer because you have almost like an exit or a way out if you do end up having to do that or to utilize that. If your body is feeling stressed or like you cannot handle the situation anymore, having that distance or even taking an additional step back is going to help your brain kind of calm down, and it can really make you feel safer just subconsciously and help with any sort of like physical reactions that you're having. Also, asking for help is completely okay. So if you're in a situation and you can't either regulate yourself, you can't calm yourself down, or you genuinely don't know how to help the person in front of you, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to bring another person in for that support. And that is going to bring that anxiety and stress level down as well, because you have another person there with you and you don't feel as threatened usually when there's an additional person with you. You also want to trust your instincts or trust your gut. If your instincts or your gut are telling you that, this person is not calming down, this person is getting to a point where I feel like I'm in physical danger, you can walk away. You can end that conversation or that communication or that interaction. It is okay to trust that gut of yours. And practicing is very important. So it can be difficult to remember to use these skills. So the key is to practice outside of escalated or crisis situations. That allows the skill to turn more into a habit or like an automated response that your body does in the situation. So instead of that response of like nervous shaking or sweating or needing to move around, you can almost create a new automatic response or a habit of doing that opposite thing, maybe grabbing something, pulling a person in, or doing the breathing techniques, anything like that. So you really want to practice as you are going through and learning these different techniques. There are some other ways to manage anxiety and stress. So these are some different everyday options. So keeping physically active, avoiding alcohol, cutting back on caffeine, meditation or yoga, prioritizing sleep, fueling your body by eating, journaling, socializing. So all of these things are very good for anxiety and for mental health in general. So different endorphins can be released when you are active or when you're eating or when you're doing activities you enjoy, when you're laughing. So endorphins are these like feel good hormones and are amazing for mental health, mental well-being. So by doing these different things, you are increasing your mental health in a positive way and can make dealing with situations that are escalated a little bit easier because you have that better mental health kind of outside of your job or outside of that interaction. Yoga and meditation are very good for decreasing stressors. They decrease that physiological response that we have because it's very body focused and mind focused, and it really kind of gets you inside of your own mind and allows you to understand kind of what's going on. And then just some final takeaways, some final tips, ask yourself those 2 questions so you can work towards understanding how you need to handle your own response. So where do I find myself in disagreements or when I'm stressed? Am I the people pleaser? Do I have that need to be right? Whatever it may be. And that how does my body respond when I am stressed or in a disagreement? So we're all going to kind of naturally have that like adrenaline release, but I'm talking more about the physical outward reaction. So getting flushed, sweaty palms, the nervous like movement, getting louder, stuff like that. And then just some final tips. And again, it's going to be a little bit repetitive, but being empathetic and non-judgmental, respecting personal space, using non-threatening nonverbal, so that body language, facial expressions, posture, avoiding overreacting, focusing on feelings, ignoring challenging questions or those questions that are maybe more abusive or not really informational or factual, setting limits or setting those boundaries we talked about, allowing for some silence for the escalated person as well as yourself, and then allowing time for decisions. So the person who's escalated to make decisions, but then also for yourself to make decisions on what to do next. So that is kind of all I have, but I do want to allow for time for questions because I know it's a lot of information in about an hour or so. So if there are questions, and Kirsten, I don't know if you also want to jump back in at all or how that works.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Allie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Of course. So, yeah, feel free to type any questions or comments in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm monitoring both of those as we're giving you guys a couple minutes to just type those or think about any questions you might have. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So this is recorded. It will be up on our website within about 48 working hours. I did put that website in the chat, but I'll put it in there one more time for everyone. And then you'll get a follow-up survey or follow-up email tomorrow with that link that I just put in the chat. So you'll have the access to the presentation and the recording at your fingertips. And then you also will have a link to a follow-up survey in your follow-up email. And I am going to put that in the chat right now as well. So if you want to go ahead and click on it, I know for me, I'm not going to take a follow-up survey unless it's like right after the professional development session that I attended, while it's like fresh in my mind and while I'm thinking about it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put that follow-up survey in the chat too. If you have a couple minutes today, feel free to take it. Otherwise, it is in your follow-up email that will be sent to you tomorrow. So we do have a couple questions, Allie. So Anne says, what is the best way to navigate this in a group situation rather than one-on-one?
That's a really good question. So in a group situation, it's going to be most helpful to try to separate the individual from the group. You don't want to do this in a shame or blame way, but more it coming across as for their benefit. So if you can, let's say you're in a room and there's a hallway or another room next door that you can pull that person out to, you can say to them, I see that, this is a really important topic, or this is a really important thing for you. I want to hear more about it. Can we, step out here or step to this other room so we can talk about it more?
Awesome. Okay, so we're getting a lot of Christy says, very good points covered. Thank you. Cynthia says, great session. Emily says, session has been very helpful. Thank you for the info. So lots of thank yous to you as the presenter, Allie.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we'll give everyone a couple more minutes because it's only 10:58. So we'll stay on till 11 for any questions. Okay. Sherry says, when people have a pattern of getting out of control caused by their inability to regulate time, they get loud and lose touch with reality. So that's just a comment from Sherry.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and adding that in. It's very true.
Okay, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes. Any questions? Oh, Sherry says, how do you handle that? Okay, so when people have a pattern of getting out of control caused by their inability to regulate time, they get loud and lose touch with reality. How do you handle that? How do you suggest they handle that, Allie?
Yeah. So when it comes to maybe more severe mental health concerns, there are going to be some different approaches. You want to be the same way. You want to be respectful and open and asking the open-ended questions and being receptive to what they are saying. But you don't want to, let's say if they're losing touch with reality or time or anything, and if that looks like hallucinations or something like that, like you don't want to confirm that those things are happening. You want to validate that they're experiencing it, but not that it's like a real thing. So if you are dealing with someone who can't, trying to think how to word it. So time specifically, it is helpful to have something physically with you to help with that person. So if they are losing time in a specific way where it's actual time, they think that it is a different day or a different year, that is going to be a little bit different than if it's like they don't realize how much time they've been spending at a place or how much time they've been handling this issue with the person. So if it's something like that, kind of setting a boundary or a limit with them, with like a physical timer type thing, like I can spend an hour with you, I can spend 30 minutes with you, because they get wrapped up in the concern. But if it's something where they're losing actual like days and are having a concern in that way, I think that would be more about explaining to them or helping them realize where they are. But some folks do not want to hear that or do not want to accept those certain things. So it could just be about being an open ear or listening to them as they're going through or explaining different things and attempting to either end the conversation or move forward with what they're actually needing help with. I hope that answered the question. I apologize if it didn't.
Yeah, Sherry says excellent. So thank you for that. Expertise. So Ryan says that this may be a bigger question than can be answered at this time. But what are some major principles and values you can build into your organization's culture or your relationships to prevent escalation?
Yeah, that definitely is a big question because changing culture is a big feat, but being non-judgmental is going to be a huge one. I think that there are a lot of preconceived notions that can make people judge other folks before even experiencing any sort of interaction with them. And so when you're talking about work culture, you want to have that open, non-judgmental, accepting work culture for the staff, for the clients or the individuals that you work with, whether that's the public or something more private. But you want to be able to have everyone involved in your organization or within your company or institution have an open mind and be willing to learn or understand rather than just have these preconceived notions that they're stuck on. We could definitely talk about it for hours because it's, like I said, it is a big feat, but I think that's a good place to start.
Ryan says, thank you. We had somebody asked anonymously, when you feel that you are starting to escalate yourself, what is the best way to de-escalate yourself when the other person is not trying to de-escalate the situation? I think we've all been in that situation.
Yes. So if you are finding yourself escalated, doing those different coping skills that we talked about would be where I would start. But my guess is that you're talking about when those don't work and you just kind of keep going and going and going and you just can't calm down because there are going to be situations that are like that, and that's normal and that's okay. So that would be when I would suggest pulling another person in or walking away and letting yourself exit that situation so you can take a breather, you can kind of re-regulate away from the escalated person, because the same way you are going to influence the person with your behavior, they're going to influence you with their behavior. So if they're escalated, you can kind of keep escalating too. So taking that step back and allowing yourself to kind of regulate outside of that situation is going to be the best thing for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Allie.
Yeah, of course.
Sherry says that whoever asked that question, that was a good question. De-escalating self, re-regulate away from the other person. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think, just from my personal experience, that's harder to do. Yes. But from my personal experience, if you are a manager or a person who's coming from a power position, I think that skill to be able to de-escalate yourself really needs to be formed because you are the leader, so to speak, in that situation that's being escalated.
Yeah. And that's where that practice kind of comes in of, asking yourself those different questions about what I struggle with, how I feel, and how do I regulate myself and practice that regulation so it is easier in those moments.
Yeah. Kind of requires us to do some self-reflection for sure as individuals in the workplace. Yes. Sandra says, are there certain phrases that work on de-escalating people?
Yeah, so in the presentation a little bit, I'm probably halfway through, I'd say. So using the positive statements is going to be helpful when you're talking with them. So if you are, I wonder if I'll pull it up on just the papers that I have so I don't change the slide and go searching. But you want to use reflective and empathetic responses when you're talking with them. And when you're using the different positive statements of, so and so specializes in this, let me grab them because they can help us, they can help you. Showing some empathy in, I understand that you're feeling this way because of this situation. How can I help? Or you're asking for help in this way. So really being detailed in your responses so that they can feel heard and understood and start to kind of calm down, because their brain's going to tell them, okay, you're being heard, you're being listened to. So you can start to kind of de-escalate. It's that like physiological thing. They're feeling safe. So they don't have to be defensive. They don't have to escalate the situation further.
Arlene says, what is the best way to de-escalate in a classroom setting? Or do you have any suggestions for specifically a classroom setting?
Yeah, so that's gonna be very similar to the group setting. So specifically, I think with kids, if you're the only person, like let's say you're a teacher and you're in the classroom and you don't have another person, which most do not, you may not be able to step out to another room because you can't leave probably 34 other kids because the classroom sizes are huge now by themselves, right? So that could be maybe having some sort of space in your room that you designate for folks who are struggling. So if you have an area that you can sit with them that is deemed a safe place that you define at the beginning of like the school year, at the beginning of when you start working with these different kids, that can allow for that separation, but also it still allows you to kind of stay and watch the other kids that you have in the room. If you do have the ability to step out, that is a good thing as well. But I know, like I said, most people don't. So just having a space designated where you can kind of separate that person from any overwhelming or like chaotic environments or other kids or people involved.
Yeah. Okay, an anonymous attendee asked, are there any de-escalation techniques you suggest for situations specifically in virtual meetings or over phone calls? I think that is super needed. Um,
Yes.
I know working within the system, sometimes there can be very escalated situations, but because we're over Zoom and people have their cameras off, or because we are on phone calls, there's no ability for any kind of nonverbal communication. So there's a lot of miscommunication because like you're not able to see their facial expressions or their eyes and kind of get that more empathetic,
Mhm.
I guess, nature that we typically get from that nonverbal communication. So then situations that probably don't really need to be escalated tend to become more escalated. So I think that's a great question, whoever asked that.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably everyone on here has experienced that at some point, whether they were in the audience or a part of that interaction. But I think that even though you're not in person, you are still able to use the different verbal ways of de-escalating. And so if you can, obviously not step away with the person, but if you can either get on an individual call or an individual chat with the person, that would be a good option. But most of the time that probably won't be, because if you are leading a meeting or you are a main person within the meeting or whatever is going on, you can't just leave. So if you set some boundaries in the moment, whether that is I hear that you are upset, or I understand that you're upset because of this thing. You can redirect back to what you were originally talking about and set that boundary of we can meet later individually to kind of go over it, or you can in the moment talk with them about it. And if it's a concern that multiple people could probably have, talking with them in the actual meeting could be helpful because it can help the other people understand as well. But if it's an individual concern and they are being, what they're saying is uncalled for, what it's not professional, it's not helpful to any sort of topic that you're covering, you are definitely allowed to kind of like interrupt them and redirect back to what you were originally talking about, and just letting them know that either right now is not the appropriate time to talk about it, but that you want to have a discussion with them about it later on and would love to set up a meeting with them. Or if they are continuously and do not stop, it's okay to also kind of like kick them out of the meeting completely, because it's not going to be helpful and it's just going to increase stress for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think and I'm not a licensed social worker like Allie is, but just speaking from experience when I've been in those situations, I think um, really addressing that you do hear their concern and you do want to talk to them about it, but this is not the place to do that. And can you call me after this meeting, or can we schedule a time after this meeting to address that concern? Like letting them know that you hear them, but
Yes,
you remaining professional in that situation too will help, I think, de-escalate it.
exactly. Yes.
So, okay, all the questions today. Okay. Okay, so Sandra says, thank you for the tips and suggestions of what not to do. It seems due to COVID, remote working, or rotations like hybrid. A lot of our state people, Allie, are hybrid. So some people are in some days, some people are in other days. So it's like rotating. Going into the physical office has led to increased experiences of anxiety and difficulty to adjust again to the workforce. And do you have any suggestions to help individuals to de-escalate their own personal feelings of anxiety for staff so that they can function better and handle stress? And I can relate to this because I think that being away from the face-to-face interaction for so long, now having to go back to that, it is increasing anxiety and like increasing, I think, individuals' ability to be empathetic when escalating situations arise because we just haven't had to deal with it for so long.
Right, right. And that is very, very common, very typical, especially coming from a time where we were like 100% working from home, going into either like a hybrid 50-50 or even fully back in office. That anxiety is going to come up for a lot of people. So it's not something that is out of just like strange or not normal. It is very, very typical. So I think that a part of what you would want to do personally is figure out what is feeding that anxiety. Are you having anxiety about the actual work you're doing? Are you having anxiety about the face-to-face interaction? Are you having anxiety about getting COVID? Are you having anxiety about the drive into work or the drive home from work? Like, what exactly is fueling that anxiety? And then from there, kind of moving into developing those different coping skills around kind of calming yourself down, or processing through and dealing with that anxiety in the moment. I think that if there are situations that are maybe a more chronic or constant anxiety. It could be something that maybe you need some sort of accommodation at work in order to not have to do that thing that is causing that chronic anxiety, as long as it, doesn't interfere with the job actually getting done, which if you're working completely from home and then going back into office, your job could be done virtually, right? So asking for some sort of accommodation is perfectly acceptable, and just going from there, but you really have to kind of understand what is fueling your anxiety, and that can kind of lead you into, okay, what do I need to develop, or what skill do I need to develop to help with that?
Great suggestions. Okay, Ryan says, in your opinion, do you think taking the time out to discuss and de-escalate the situation is worth it if it derails your initial goals? Probably, I'm assuming, Ryan, you're referring to like a meeting. So, for example, is it worth it to take time out in a class? Oh, okay, you give me an example. For example, is it worth it to take a time out in a class to address an escalated situation? Because the impact on the individual and the class, I imagine the answer is that it depends, but I could see a lot of value in having students witness how to navigate a stressed situation or conflict. I also think the relationship rewards are worth it in other situations too, not just in the classroom. So I guess the question, Allie, is do you think it's worth it to take the time out of like a classroom setting, for example, or even like a meeting, we're all pressed for time because that to de-escalate a situation does take time, right? Even if it derails the initial goals of the meeting or of the class lecture or whatever.
Yeah. So kind of like it said in the message, it does depend. But I would say most of the time it is worth it, especially in a classroom setting. A meeting setting is going to be a little bit different, but in a classroom setting, you said it perfectly. You are setting an example of the appropriate way to handle and deal with an escalated situation, or how to handle and deal with these intense emotions that the students in the classroom could feel at a future time. So they are witnessing you being a safe person interacting with the escalated student and helping them and being there for them and trying to work through it with them. So they are going to feel a lot more safe in that classroom because of that. If it's a situation that becomes too escalated or violent or something like that, then that would be a case where I would say it may not be worth it, because it could turn into more of like a danger type situation. But in general, I would say that it is worth it to take that time, because kids are there to learn, but that's not just what is on your curriculum. It's also they're developing as children. They're understanding and learning how to interact with each other, with you as an adult, with the world. And it's important for them to have positive examples and see, okay, this is how I handle that. This is how maybe I don't handle that.
Yeah, even for like our adult educators, I think that that's relevant too, because a lot of us are teaching, um, younger adults or teaching adults who haven't been maybe necessarily in the most professional setting of a workplace, or they haven't been taught professional skills in a workplace before. So you being able to teach them how to handle those situations through that example, right? They're just learning by watching at that point. I still think it's relevant even for the young adults and the adults that we deal with, like for Title II, working with adult students.
Well, and when you think about it, they learned how to handle those situations from somewhere. So most likely that is when they were a kid. So if you are dealing with an adult in a classroom who is escalating and is struggling, that is usually their inner child kind of coming out. They're not feeling safe, and they need to feel safe again. So it's very similar. You're just dealing with almost their inner child, but in a 20-something-year-old body, or 30-something or 40-something, whatever age they may be. But they're still actively relearning how to handle those situations, and everyone else in that room can probably benefit from that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what are some things you can do after the escalated conversation to not take your feelings of anxiety into the next conversation that you have? I love that question.
Yeah. Um, Definitely some sort of like debriefing is necessary after an escalated situation or trying to de-escalate someone. So if you are in a situation, it just ended and it was escalated, it was a lot of energy, and you had to do a lot of different things that were either new or uncomfortable, or maybe folks who were escalated like said some hurtful things or something like that. You want to debrief with someone, or even with yourself, and just take a second. So whether that is with your supervisor, with a coworker, whoever it may be, just being able to kind of talk about it and re-regulate yourself in that way, because you're not going to be regulated most likely when you leave that situation. So you want to give yourself a second before moving on to your next meeting or next thing, or even next interaction with that same person. You need time to kind of regulate and give yourself just a little bit of space to be human and figure out, okay, what do I need right now?
Absolutely. Okay. If you have someone who seems to escalate over every scenario that is brought up to them, for example, when people ask questions or ask for information through email and also in person, this person, they seem to get defensive and make a mountain out of a molehill, so to say. How do you suggest that one reacts to that? Should you talk to them about the scenarios to see if there is something else that's triggering that? Or do you think they just don't realize that they are escalating and causing tension and stressors with the other people they are working with?
Um, it honestly sounds like the person could be anxious themselves. So, I'm wondering if maybe the way that they are being communicated with just isn't working for them. And so asking them how they prefer communication can be really helpful. So if they are emailing and asking in person, that sounds kind of like some anxiety to me, because they really want that answer so that they can kind of regulate themselves about the situation or the question. Um, but having just an open discussion and letting that person tell you what they need or how they need it, and then you kind of accommodating them however you can, would be helpful. So if you do that and they continuously are kind of going back to that email and in-person questions and it's still escalating, then it may be more about what about the certain questions, or what about maybe the person or people they're asking is making them kind of ask more than once, and just really trying to have like a one-on-one conversation with that person, rather than kind of not ignoring it, but assuming what it could be about. You want to have that one-on-one with them to let them explain and kind of come to what's going to work for everyone involved.
The person who asked that question says thank you. And then Sandra says, thank you, very helpful information. Ryan says, awesome, thank you.
Of course.
Okay. What a great discussion.
Definitely.
I don't see any other questions. So just a quick plug one more time. We will be sending a follow-up email. We do have a recording ready to go for the session. And then that will be up on our website. The follow-up email will have the link to that. It'll have the presentation, the recording, and the follow-up survey. And then just a quick plug for our session next week. So next Wednesday's session is considerations for working with LGBTQIA plus participants. This is a follow-up session from last week's session. So Allie's kind of right in the middle of that two-part webinar series. So we will be joined next week by DJ Ralston again. And they are an expert on this topic. They themselves are a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So they can speak from personal experience as well as from a researcher standpoint, and they have pretty much dedicated their work to this topic. And they also used to work in an LWIA, so they also are really coming from a place of understanding the type of work that the system does here in Illinois. So just a quick plug for next week's session. If you want to register for next week's session, if you haven't already, I'm going to put the registration link in the chat there for you. So that's for next week. And then it's a follow-up to the session that was last Wednesday. So if you missed that and you want to watch the recording is also on our website here. So you can watch the recording there as well from last week's session. That was an introduction to social identity, bias, and power dynamics in helping relationships. And DJ also was the presenter on that session as well. And then next week's session is the follow-up to that. So working with the LGBTQIA plus community. Okay, Maureen says, repeated and redirecting and navigating back to the issue at hand can be like play practice, learning your lines and performing in real time. Thank you for a good webinar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions coming through. Oh, Ryan says, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise. I feel much stronger and more capable of navigating my own anxiety and working with others who are anxious, both in my personal and professional relationships.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's awesome feedback, Ryan.
Thank you.
And I think, a lot of this stuff takes practice and it takes intentionality to be able to de-escalate a situation, because as humans, I think our initial reaction is to escalate more. So it takes some intentionality on our part as individuals.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to put the follow-up survey link in the chat one more time. If all of you who are saying thank you want to go ahead and take that, we would greatly appreciate it. On behalf of the WIO Professional Development Committee that I sit on, I would really appreciate if you took the time to take that follow-up survey. And then I'll go ahead and close this out. It's 11:29, so we are closing out on time. Everybody's saying thank you. Thank you one more time, Allie, for your time today and your expertise. We really appreciate it. And everyone have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you for having me.